I am myself and my husband are kind of like cultural chameleons. And
What if your cultural identity is already complex and then you go on an expat posting? This is From Canada to Adana, and this is another expat conversation. Asra Ghori and I talk about our experience as a first generation American and East Indian in Istanbul.
So welcome, Asra, to Expat Conversations. Let's just get a couple of biographical things out of the way. Where are you from and where are you now?
originally from the Bay Area, moved to Seattle, went to Istanbul, and now we're back in Seattle.
Yeah, and we met in Istanbul, where
Yes.
obviously we were all expats.
Mm-hmm.
But your expat status was a bit more complicated in Istanbul, wasn't it?
Yes, it was interesting because, we're both, myself and my husband, are first generation, immigrants. And so our first generation American, myself, and Hanny, my husband, is first generation Canadian. And so I think to some extent we both sort of identify with being a little bit more, for my husband, more Canadian, and myself a little bit of both, South Asian American. So, and then being an expat in Turkey, we were, not seen as I would say, the stereotypical expat, what maybe people would, people in Turkey might have in mind stereotypically as an American expat or a Canadian expat. So that was interesting, and I think it also shed into light our own cultural similarities of both having a Muslim background and living as an expat in a Muslim country.
Do you mean your similarities with Turkish people or with each other?
Yes, with Turkish people.
Yeah, marks. But when I moved to Turkey, other parts of my background, my identity suddenly came to the forefront. So suddenly I felt more German than I had ever felt before, because I had, my dad's Germany and we lived in Germany when I was a child. So I had an opportunity to, in many ways, be closer to Germany than I ever had been in living in Canada. So I'm wondering if, did parts of your Indian heritage suddenly feel closer to you once you were outside of the States?
It's actually the opposite. It was interesting. I thought that I was more going into living in Istanbul, and prior to being an expat, I thought, I'm kind of half, or I'm South Asian American. But when I moved to Istanbul, there's little parts of me that realize I'm like, wow, I'm more American than I thought. Where, for instance, I really missed peanut butter, or I missed certain aspects of the very American palate or American lifestyle. But at the same time, I was grappling with my Indian Muslim identity. So being in a predominantly Muslim country. So, that was interesting.
So you guys went to Istanbul as expats. You always knew you weren't going to stay there. You were there for 4 years, 3 years?
Almost. Yep, just short of 4 years.
Yet, at least from my point of view, it seemed that you guys really did a good job of integrating into Turkish society, as much as an expat can. Like, you guys were curious to, you guys learned to speak some Turkish, you had real Turkish experiences. I mean, you had your second son in Istanbul. I don't think you had both of them there, did you?
No.
Yeah. So, like, what do you think like, is that a reflection of your philosophy or your attitude specifically about that experience? Or is that just your personality? Because I mean, you could have just gone there, lived in your expat bubble for 4 years, and then gone home and never looked back.
It was really interesting because I think we had I had no expectations, because I had never been to Turkey prior to this experience, and so I think it was just sort of our natural nature, to want to explore. I really like speaking different languages. I mean, my family, they speak Urdu, so I have that background. And then I spoke Spanish in high school, and I still speak some Spanish. So I think it was, I enjoy learning languages. So that was not a huge hurdle. I mean, I was never really 100% obviously proficient in learning Turkish, but I enjoyed trying and communicating in the language. And in terms of getting to know the culture, I also felt like the expat community, you talk about the expat community bubble, and there's definitely some people who I felt connected to, like yourself, and but so oftentimes I felt like the expat community was a bubble, like you said, and I didn't always feel like I connected with that 100% either, because they might have been expats that are continuing to be expats, so they stay in that bubble. And so and some those people, and I'm not stereotyping, but some of them are more open to going outside of the bubble. So I kind of just went with the flow of what I felt comfortable doing.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, you guys had the choice after Istanbul to go to another expat posting or to return to the States. Would you have enjoyed to go somewhere else? Do you want to comment a little bit on that, on the decision?
So this was obviously, both myself and my husband Hanny, we love traveling, and we were interested in possibly going to the Philippines, which was brought up, and then Dubai. And I think what ended up happening was, our kids were pretty young, and our oldest at the time was 3.5, almost 4. And we started seeing developmental delays or developmental challenges, I would say, sensory issues, things like that. And so we realized that, just like any parent, you kind of need to prioritize what we are looking for. And we weren't closing ourselves off to like, okay, we have to go back to the States because they have a variety of more therapy options for our child. But we also, so we did look at other options in Dubai and in the Philippines, but ended up being that my husband just was able to get a better opportunity back in the States. I have also, I think, regardless of where I wanted to go, another factor was I wanted to go back to working. And I did work in Istanbul a little bit. I was able to do speech therapy work at some of the international schools. However, I think I really wanted to go back into the routine of like, just of a career. So I think that was a really big factor in, where we would go as expats, or if we ever decide to go do an expat stint again. So
I'm wondering if you could give a piece or two of advice, maybe to a trailing spouse, not really a term I like, but let's say someone like you who has a career, goes with their spouse to an expat posting.
Mhm.
The way you were able to not completely get cut off from your career, like you were able to sort of stay, you know, close to speech therapy. Do you have any advice for someone who, because it sounds like you were kind of doing it on a freelance basis, but how could someone create something like that for themselves?
I think, you know, I think it's important to understand where career is for you. And for me at the time, I just had my firstborn. And so I was already putting career a little bit on hold because of that. But, you know, and I think it's important to figure out like where are you in terms of putting career on hold? Like if you were back in your home country, would you put your child or infant in a daycare situation to continue your career? So I think it's important to think about like, what would you do in your home country to keep your career going? And then are you okay with doing that? Are you able to do that in your expat situation? And if not, is that okay?
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Thank you. So let's talk about your kids for a second. So they are American, they are Canadian, they are Indian. What identity do you try to foster in them, or do you just leave it up to, you know, whatever happens, happens? Like, are you intentional about that?
That's a very good question. I think as first generation, me being South Asian American, and Hani husband being, you know, half Palestinian, half Pakistani Canadian, I think we are both, to some extent, we realize that, you know, we have one more or less like acclimated more to being, for instance, being a mix of both, or acclimated more to being Canadian. So in Hanny's case, he's more, I think, identifies with being more Canadian. And that has to do with sort of like his parents maybe perhaps acclimating more, and then mine being more of a mix. So I think for our kids, how that translates into our children and how we are raising our children is that they see that in us. Kids are smart. They see that in the climate that we're in right now. I think we're really fostering to our children that, you know, we're brown, this is our identity, and this is where our family came from. And it is confusing for them a little bit because they're like, are we American or am I Canadian? They've never been to India, so they really have no way of identifying themselves as being Indian. So it is really hard for them to like grasp where they are from. You know, I didn't say, well, I was born in Turkey, so am I Turkish? So, um, and so we really, you know, try to bring culture in through food. Like food is really important to both myself and Hanny. So we talk about like we make a lot of Indian food or Arab food, as well as with our family. So I think our relatives, our cousins, and connecting with them is a way that we help with them identifying and feeling proud of where they're from.
Yeah.
So, and they are a hodgepodge. They are the new global citizen.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. It's very interesting. Yeah, that's a topic that's dear to my heart too.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's always evolving.
Yeah. I think that at different ages, maybe certain parts of someone's identity also come more to the forefront and then others recede. And that might be because of age. it might be because of where you're at and your surroundings at that time, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens as they get older.
Yeah.
My last question, how was the repatriation process to the States? You guys moved back to Seattle.
I just remember really appreciating parts of both cultures. So I loved the greenery of Seattle and the open spaces. And so for me, that was just, I appreciated that so much more than, and even now, than I did before. So you just appreciate things that you may have not. I appreciated being closer to my family versus being, a whole continent, uh, I think 15 and 16-hour flight away. So that was really big. And then parts of Turkey that I still miss is that that it's like a village, but an urban village where, you go to the park and people immediately, say, this is your abla, or, this is your brother or your sister, even, versus a stranger culture, which is more predominant in North American culture. So we really miss that. And the community, the expat community, even though, it kind of is this bubble, you develop this closeness, because that you're in this together.
Yeah.
So we miss that. And gosh, so much in terms of the food, the language. But that was one of the biggest things I noticed coming back here, and that we missed.
Some of those same things I've realized now after being here 14 years, that if I moved back to Canada, I would struggle, like almost like a reverse culture shock. Like I would really miss some of the things here that have become so normal for me, and that I appreciate. Yeah, for sure. Asra, is there anything we haven't talked about that you think we should, or that you want to?
I mean, I think like we could talk about cultural identity on and on. So that's just a topic that I think everyone grapples with. I am, myself and my husband are kind of like cultural chameleons, and so, if I was to go to, when I go to South America, people think I'm South American. When I go to Turkey, people think I'm Turkish. When I go to the, East Asia, sometimes people think people think I'm Filipina. So I think there is, your culture identity, how you're seen in terms of a global citizen I think that's changing and evolving. So I just think that's a continuous conversation.
Definitely. Asra, thank you so much. I'm sorry Hani couldn't join us, but I think he did a really good job representing him too.
Are you a cultural chameleon, or is your identity more straightforward? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it the thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so that you'll be the first to know when the next video comes out. Bye!